Hello, hello. Welcome to At Home with the Intuitive Cook, the podcast giving a voice to everyday home cooks like you and me. Join me around the kitchen table as we chat about finding cooking ease and inspiration beyond rules and recipes and the noise of celebrity chef culture. It's not rocket science, it's just dinner. Hello and welcome to a fresh episode of At Home. I'm your host, Katerina Pavlakis, also known as the Intuitive Cook. And my guest at the kitchen table today is Elle Hunt. Elle is a freelance journalist writing mostly for The Guardian, and her choice of themes is impressively wide and colorful. She has written very eloquently about her journey of learning to cook, and this is how I got to know her in the first place. Writing or chatting, she's incredibly thoughtful and articulate, so this episode is a really special one. You're in for a treat. Elle, welcome to the podcast.
I'm so glad you agreed to talk to me about your cooking.
Thank you for thinking of me. Happy to be here.
I first found out about your journey with cooking by that article you wrote in The Guardian about your journey. I really like how you talk about the mindset shift that got you cooking. Tell me a bit more about that. I'm really interested in that.
Well, as you'll have read in that piece, for most of my adult life, I was a really terrible cook. People say that they're terrible cooks, but I was genuinely very, very bad. It wasn't for lack of skills. My mother had made an effort to teach me and my sister like basics, like how to make a bolognese and cut an onion and things like that when we were kids. But when I got older, it just wasn't really something I got any pleasure out of. I really did just see food as fuel. I enjoyed it when other people made it for me or when I was eating out, but I never really saw it as something that was worth my investment of time and energy. I would just kind of graze from the fridge. And that was perpetuated because for many years I lived with people who did like cooking, and it didn't make sense for anyone involved for me to kind of push them from something they liked doing so that I could experiment and get better. I think of it now a bit like when you're learning a language and, you know, a French speaker can also speak English fluently, or you can kind of impose yourself upon them and have a very bad conversation about colors and pets and stuff like that. So I just kind of went with the flow of, you know, they'd cook and I'd wash up afterwards and everyone was happy. But the real shift came about when I moved into a flat by myself and also started really burning out at work. And that was sort of, I hadn't made the connection beforehand, but my aversion to cooking and just seeing food as fuel and something I kind of had to get through was linked to my workaholism. And so when I started unpicking that value, I guess, at the bottom of it, I then started learning to enjoy cooking and to kind of push myself a bit more. And now I would say I like doing it for myself. I still make some questionable meals, but I can also confidently feed others something that's edible. And I also, you know, if I have more time one evening, I will try a new recipe and learn from those skills. And speaking to you really helped as well after I had written that initial piece.
You talk about how you worked at your skills by nailing a recipe first and then making it your own. And that is where that improvising, that freestyle cooking comes in, isn't it? It's that step of making it your own.
I think that was a later step for me. Like one of the things when I was learning to cook, I would try a recipe I really liked the sound of and then not do it very well and then have lots of it and then get sort of disheartened. So I had to go back a step to making recipes that was like impossible to mess up. So the Roasting Tin series is really popular. That's Rukmini Iyer. And I found that really good in terms of it was mostly just chopping and then roasting. And just that kind of virtuous cycle you create of, I made this is a good thing, I can continue enjoy eating it. That sort of then let me gradually become more confident and experimental. But definitely at the start, one of the mistakes I made was being too ambitious and then kind of having to eat the bad tasting consequences, which just made me not want to try again.
It's not so much about simple food, right? It's about simple techniques, as you say, chopping stuff and roasting it. But if you understand the flavors, or if you're following a recipe that has interesting flavors, then you don't need to do anything more difficult than that.
And also, I think like it was almost something that often kind of messed me up was timing, like too many elements going on at once. That was when I'd usually burn something or get distracted. But when I made those roasting tin recipes, they are so simple. I kind of carried on making them. And once I knew how the recipe worked, it then became easier to more confidently make substitutions. And I guess that was the first shift I made towards being not so recipe driven, where it was like I knew enough and knew the recipe well enough to know that I could change like kale with like chard and something, and it would make it slightly different, but not mess anything up.
Yeah, and you also just mentioned this sort of momentum, right? When you do it once and then it's good, and then that makes you want to keep it doing rather than put you off.
Yeah, exactly. Because again, in my old ways, I don't really love to cook extensively every day. I don't mind living on leftovers, and that was how I got by for a long time. But when I got into the rhythm of it, I did sort of try and make an effort to it, like at least try and cook some part of it each day, like not just live on the microwave. Like I would keep a sauce aside, but make the pasta new or change the leftovers a little bit just to keep the sort of streak going. And the other thing that was helpful was also just kind of building a relationship with those recipe writers. You know, they each have a style. You sort of know you can trust someone and what kind of food they produce. And then you become more confident, like either changing it up a little bit based on your experience of their other recipes, or knowing who to look for to solve what problem. Like I don't necessarily use the roasting tin so much anymore because I've sort of surpassed that. But I know I can go to it when I'm really time poor or really can't be bothered, because it's like my baseline level 101. And then with Anna Jones, who was probably the next cookbook author that I really resonated with, she's kind of where I would go to if I wanted to try a new recipe, because I know how reliable they are and I sort of trust them. Whereas I think I was also just like picking things randomly from the internet, and not all of those recipes are very good, which I didn't understand before.
I like that what you say, that you really build a relationship with a cookbook and obviously its writer.
I never really thought of that before, because I just assumed it was instructions. So it's like how much personality can go into it, which is naive when I think about it now that I know a bit more about the testing and the process that goes in. But yeah, like yesterday, for instance, I sort of randomly felt like making a banana bread as I had some leftover ripe bananas. And usually I would just Google banana bread recipe and go for like BBC Good Food or something like that. But like I just looked up, I was like, sure, Anna Jones has one in the book. And it comes out tasting like Anna Jones's recipes. It's very strange. You wouldn't think there would be that opportunity for personalization in a recipe like that. But it's just, I guess, like for me, being able to feel confident was a lot about like finding those people I could trust. And they're not the same for everyone as well, in that I've been given some cookbooks that my friends swear by and I just can't find a foothold in them, and they just sit on my shelf untouched, you know?
I find this always fascinating, how a cookbook style might speak to you, but also how a recipe speak to us. I mean, you might be flipping through a book and then there is that one recipe that you think, oh yeah, I'm just going to make that. And I mean, why that one and not the other one?
Yeah, you have these books, like I've got 4 or 5 on the shelf, and I've made 5 of those recipes probably dozens of times. And the other ones I have not even considered. And I would like to kind of do that. I would like to push myself more into trying more of the sort of corners of the books that I have already and the recipe authors I know I like. But at the same time, trying a new recipe sort of it makes me feel kind of nervous the way that I used to, where it's like, oh, if that doesn't go right, I could feel myself being disheartened and I don't want to go back to eating the bad recipes again. So there is a confidence that you have to just try it and know that it doesn't matter if it turns out badly.
Tell me more about that. Because I really think there is something there about, well, actually, it doesn't matter so much if it turns out badly.
Well, it's kind of difficult. When I'm just feeding myself, I know that I can kind of choke it down. Like I need to eat, so it doesn't matter. But usually if I want to kind of impress or push myself, it will be because I have someone coming over. I'll make more of an effort. But if you try a recipe you haven't tried before and someone's coming over, then the stakes are quite high. So you have to find this balance between experimenting a bit in your home on your own so that you can confidently repeat it when you have guests over. But you also never feel like that at the end of a day of work when you just want to eat, sort of thing. So I do sort of try and not just lean on the 3 dishes I know I can eat and reliably enjoy every day, just so that you're kind of preparing for a time when you want to have something new. But it's that tension between, I guess, familiarity and novelty. You don't always feel like trying something new when you're just looking to eat, but then when you do want to impress, you don't have anything new to try.
So what are you cooking today?
I haven't cooked yet. The banana bread, I've just been sort of grazing on that. What will I cook today? Yeah, this is like yesterday. I'm very motivated by bargains as well. And so I found some highly discounted chicken thighs at Sainsbury's the other night. And I was like, well, I can cook those now within the use by date and then use them in some way later in the week. I'd like to have lunches in particular very easy to reach for because I'm working and it doesn't feel like my main meal of the day. And I sort of found this recipe that I liked on New York Times Cooking app, which is good. And I was like, I'll try this. It was a marinade of sour cream, Dijon mustard, and rice vinegar. And I had all of those ingredients. So I was like, well, that sounds interesting. I'll try it. And now I just have the baked chicken in that marinade. It's very nice, but I really found myself stuck on what to do, how to serve that, and what to do alongside it. So that was an interesting little cooking challenge where I sort of felt like, yep, I found the recipe to meet what I had in hand. And now I have these sort of cooked marinated chicken thighs that I don't know how to make into a meal. So that was what I was going to think about today is like, what can I get to make that into a meal instead of just grabbing a handful of chicken, which would be my old ways. That shows you the level I've reached now where it's like testing myself, but still not really confident in whipping things up or improvising. Like there's a desire there, but not necessarily the skill or knowledge.
There's just so many interesting points you're making.
Quite freewheeling in conversation.
This is wonderful because, there's not so many people who are so articulate about their journey with that.
As you know, I had to write about it and think about it. So I've probably given more thought about it than the average person. Also, things like cooking. Well, I live alone. And so it does sort of really make a big impact on your day. Like working from home, living alone, I really never kind of just grab something from prep. Feeding myself is a big part of my life. And it is like the point of friction that I kind of continually come up against. I don't think people who live in flat shares or have families necessarily realize how much that's shared, like you can count on someone else to cook for you or to think about it. So it's for me, it's like the big part of managing my life.
There is also something about eating in company or eating alone.
Yeah.
I think when I lived alone, I was cooking a lot less just because I didn't feel like cooking if I was going to eat alone.
Yeah. And I had to kind of get myself out of that mindset, like I say, because of otherwise it could get quite bleak. Like 5 years ago, I was really in that market for meal replacement powders and things like that. And that does rob you of an opportunity for joy in your day. But at the same time, I do want some level of automation and fuss-free approach. I was actually just thinking about, like in the summer, I basically had some air-fried chicken and salad essentials, and I had a chicken salad every day for lunch. Like I could put it together in 10 minutes. It always tasted good. There was some opportunity for changing it up slightly each day, but I didn't have to think about it and I enjoyed it. And now that the temperature has dropped, I don't feel like a chicken salad anymore. It feels very unseasonal. So I've been sort of searching for my uniform lunch, as it were, for the colder months. It's a bit like with your clothes where you're like in a bit of a funk because you're like, oh, I need to change how I get ready in the morning for the conditions. And I feel like I've not quite settled into that yet or found my stride in this season kind of thing.
Seasons do change our cravings, and they also, obviously, depending on how you shop, they change what's available as well.
Yeah. It's more about what I feel like. I guess it's more of a winter salad rather than a summer salad, but I don't have any recipes like that in my mind that I've tested out. So I need to find some.
Like a roast vegetable salad.
Yeah, I was just thinking that the roasting tin is probably the place to go back to. And I remember I interviewed Rukmini Iyer for the piece that I spoke to you about as well, I think, about she had come up with those recipes when she was going through a bad breakup and a period of depression. And she challenged herself to come up with formulas where it would be as easy as getting a ready meal, like it was chopping and putting in the oven. And I think I really like that story because it just shows you how there is like a kind of values and approach to life that underpins the recipes that you're reading in a book. Like, does someone take a lot of satisfaction from perfectly creating these different elements and making a real showstopper piece? Or is it someone who, like me, just wants to kind of have it done and it be a good return on minimal investment? The other book I really like that has become like my other main staple between Roasting Tin and the Anna Jones books is Ruby Tando's Cook As You Are, where she talks a lot about different meals and recipes and approaches you would take for different moods. And you can make do with, she's very big on substitutions. She's like, just don't sweat it. These are recipes that are very hard to mess up, but very reliable. And it's those kinds of authors and ideas that I sort of gravitate towards rather than the ones that are like, you know, this is hard work and fiddly, but it will pay off. I have an Ottolenghi book on the shelf and I have not brought myself to start yet.
And you also talk about how even when you have guests over, you don't necessarily need all that fussy cooking either. And people are just happy to share a meal.
Yeah, that was definitely really important for me when I started cooking. Because like I said earlier, I wasn't really that motivated to try when it was just me. But I also had really only understood dinner parties as quite formal, like you must impress occasions. But I started living alone because I was doing my master's degree. So I met many students, many of whom were kind of younger than me and at a different stage in their lives. And it was really nice to just be able to feed them and then be obviously grateful because they lived in share houses. So they didn't really get their own space or they didn't have free access to the kitchen. We all lived really close to each other in Norwich. So, you know, I could literally make dinner, realize I had tons of it and text them and say, do you want to come over for dinner? And they could be there in 20 minutes. It just really took the daunting formal element out of cooking for others that then built my confidence. And now that they have sort of moved on, they're not necessarily living here anymore, I definitely cook for people less. And it is more of a sort of slightly, because I'm not so beginner anymore, I do want to try. So there is, I do think a bit more about like, okay, they're coming over on this day. What would I like to do or try? And also people have more dietary requirements now. So there's that element, which means I can't necessarily fall back on my old staples. But that's the kind of stage I'm at now, is like gradually getting more confident with the kind of hosting side of things that isn't just like, here's a bowl of what I'm having. I've made another for you, you know?
So how does all this newfound skill and confidence in the kitchen make you feel?
It definitely makes me feel more capable. I think that was important for me because since we spoke, I've moved from when I was first living alone, I was renting. And this year in March, I bought my own flat. And that was quite a daunting shift of like, oh no, I'm responsible for everything now. And I think just having cooking managed was a good thing. It felt like a good stepwise progression from being reliant on my flatmates to feed me, learning to feed others, and then like, okay, now I have to handle everything about the house and maintaining my life. I'm glad I have it there. I also, in my new flat, have a very impressive walk-in larder, which has been super fun to kit out with the things that I know I routinely use. Like there's more of a sense of like oh, I'm living here permanently now. What kind of kitchen do I like? That was a fun part of it in terms of how can I make this usable for myself? The one thing I really desperately want is a dishwasher. That's one big impediment to me cooking as much as I'd like to, is I feel like continually doing dishes, which I do not love. So that would probably be the one barrier I could remove to enjoy it a bit more, particularly cooking for other people. Because as soon as you cook for other people, sometimes it's taken me like 3 days to get through the dishes by hand, just to allow for the space to them to air dry. And it really does make you think twice.
Oh, yeah, I do remember getting my dishwasher like a birthday present from my parents, and it wasn't that long ago. I was in my late 30s, I think, by that time.
That's an idea. Maybe I'll pitch that to my parents. It would be the number one. If before it was a skills issue, now it is more can I bring myself to make this sort of multi-day commitment of getting the food, preparing the food, and then cleaning it afterwards. But again, it is an enjoyable thing to do when I can summon the energy.
Oh, I love my dishwasher.
I can get by if it's myself, but I do cut corners and eat from the Tupperware to save myself 10 minutes every day.
Well, even I do that with a dishwasher. I often eat out of the pot, especially the leftovers.
I've noticed this as well since becoming a homeowner. We're under so much pressure to have a perfectly clean house, an aesthetically designed house, to see our friends, to work, to exercise. And really, I have kind of accepted that cooking is one where I will take corners, like if I can eat something quickly that I've already made or the same thing 3 times in a row, I don't necessarily feel like that's a sacrifice on my part. I guess my motivation now, since I've gotten better at cooking, is to make that the nicest meal possible and put a bit of effort in so that when I return to it for the second time or whatever, I'm still enjoying it. Like, it's not just scraping by, it's making that a feature of how I like to live,
So has the fact of having a walk-in larder changed your cooking, or you got a lot more ingredients around, or how has that?
It's certainly when I wrote this in the piece, when I lived with my flatmate, he just had such specific tastes that our fridge, whenever I looked into it, I didn't really see anything I fancied eating or even knew how to cook with. Like, he really liked hard cheeses and pickled things, and there was squid ink in the fridge doors and stuff. And I just didn't really know where to start. But when I lived alone, I really learned that, like, okay, I really need butter beans and cannellini beans and black beans. I use a lot of tinned beans. I really like a lot of peanut butter, things like that. I like kind of Asian sauces like oyster sauce. What's it called? Is it called ketchup mayonnaise or something like that? Love that one. Like, things like that. That has been really helpful, where I can now literally stand in the larder and I've got all of my like pulses and grains, and I've got a sort of system, and I can look at things and then kind of see what I feel like, which was really helpful. The other thing that I think did help me kind of learn new recipes as well was I signed up to one of the meal delivery services where you pick 3 recipes and they arrive with the ingredients. And I can't afford to do it weekly, and it's not always what you feel like eating anyway, but I do it when I've been away for work and haven't had time to get groceries, or if I have a guest coming to stay and I don't want to think about what I'm going to feed them, I just want something that will be good. So then I'll get 3 meals delivered with the ingredients. And in the process of following those instructions, I learned how to do it. And so that was how I came across the ketchup mayonnaise, which I would never have tried on my own, So that's been a good thing, where I get to try out recipes that are new to me and ingredients that are new to me that I then sort of bring into my own cooking, and I have that recipe forever kind of thing. So that's been one way that I've sort of, again, removed the effort of trying to come up with ideas, but still learn new skills.
And do you find it easy to then take these kind of new ingredients you discover and, use them elsewhere?
Yeah, I think I would still probably stick quite closely to how they were used in the format that I was introduced to them in. But I think what kind of does help me is once I do have the ingredient, I'm very motivated to use it up. And so that leads me to find and research other uses for it. I like playing little games in my head, like how many ingredients can I get rid of from the fridge this week? Or the repurposing leftovers one is a good one. Or if I like used a half jar of chipotle sauce for chicken and fajitas, then I'd be like, well, I've got the other half, I can use that to this. Like, it's not kind of just randomly picking recipes, but trying to make like little leapfrog jumps based on what I have is quite helpful. I really like, it's just a sort of perverse satisfaction I get in finishing. I don't like having a fridge full of half empty things. So it's kind of like, if I can use up that bottle of harissa, I will be determined to do so. And then I get to decide if I want to buy harissa again, or if I feel like that wasn't actually something that worked for me, you know?
Love this approach.
It's quite weird. I do get really fixated on it. I think also like it's a way of like, I'm freelance, so money kind of goes through peaks and troughs. And when you are at the point of waiting for invoices to come in, playing little games like that can make it seem less sad of like, oh, I've just got to live on the food that I have already. You know, like it makes you feel kind of enterprising and industrious rather than just like, gosh, I really need some money to come in.
Not throwing away food is not just a matter of saving money. It's also, you know, the right thing to do.
Yeah, I hate food waste. I guess it's partly how I was brought up in that we were a finish your plates family. And my parents are very thrifty and kind of taught my sister and I to be that as well. But when I sometimes like house sit or stay in places where I see an unfamiliar fridge, I'm always shocked by how much food has gone off already. Being a single person household, I'm very conscious of what I have at any given point, and I don't really consume more than that. The thing I have to watch out for in myself is I do have a slight, not hoarder mentality, but like I've got all of my jars of my grains and pulses, and if the jar drops like under half, I immediately buy more to fill it up. And I kind of had to reach a point of myself of like, you know, we're not going to run out of tin tomatoes anytime soon. I pass a Tesco 4 times a day. Like, I don't need to have this much on hand. But that's the thing I need to watch in myself, is the tendency to go too far with the stocking up of the essentials, you know. Hello, my cat has visited.
Ooh, hello.
There we go. Okay. 2 of them crawling around somewhere.
So what are some of your favorite ingredients? You just mentioned beans and ketchup mayonnaise. Do you have some more in your magic larder?
The thing I eat the most of is probably yogurt. Like, I never am without yogurt because I can use it as a substitute for sour cream. I can use it as a dessert. I just kind of get through so much of it. It works for salad dressings. That's probably my biggest thing. I eat quite a lot of frozen berries, frozen bananas for the same reason. In savory things, I go through phases of grains. I got into bulgur wheat from the roasting tin. I still really like that. I find like it eats well on the second day. Like sometimes like with quinoa, I find it just gets too kind of stodgy and kind of like sand, whereas I feel like with bulgur wheat, it retains the texture better. But at the moment, I'm going through a pearl barley phase. When I met you, I was making a lot of dal with red lentils. And now at the moment, I cannot face eating that again. So I've got all these red lentils and not sure of how to do with it. So I definitely go through phases. But yeah, it's sort of about having the things I know I can use on hand, and then probably only just buying the meat or vegetables and like fresh ingredients to sort of build from that. I'm having to eat a lot more protein these days because I started weightlifting 4 times a week. And that has been quite a challenge in terms of, naturally, I would rather not eat meat at every meal. So that has been something where I've had to think about what I will eat more carefully just to get anywhere near the 120 grams I'm supposed to eat a day, which is a lot. Like I started eating a lot of cottage cheese. I've started like looking at the actual labels on yogurts because some have 1 gram of protein, some have 11 grams per 100 grams. So it's like that is kind of a bit of a guide for me at the moment. And when you are thinking about that, you do end up repeating the same recipes just for the sake of like cohesion. Now I add cottage cheese to scrambled eggs, and it's actually much nicer with that, like, so it's been quite an interesting focus for my cooking, I guess.
Yeah, I guess every new season in our eating and in our life brings us new things into our kitchen too, that then sometimes they're just seasonal or sometimes they're here to stay.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something that, I don't think about when I'm cooking for others, for example. But at the moment, I can feel the difference of like, I can feel my body responding better. I've also had to start eating more carbs for that reason. I just did a half marathon, and that also kind of affected, was like, oh, I actually need to eat more than I'm used to eating because I can feel it kind of wearing on my muscles a bit. That's probably the key factor, just in terms of how I structure and think about my meals day to day. How much am I asking my body to do and what does it need? Because previously, just the fact of cooking, as you know, was enough of a challenge in and of itself,
And now, my kitchen friends, it's time for a quick break to see what I've been cooking up for you. If you ever feel trapped by recipes or wish you could get more creative in your kitchen, I made a free mini course. It's called Ditch the Recipes, and it's a short series of 5 emails that will help you get started on your intuitive cooking journey. Sign up on the website at theintuitivecook.co.uk/free or find the link in the show notes. And now, let's get back to our conversation.
So right now in your life, what is your favorite thing to eat?
That's a good question. I feel like I'm still struggling with this seasonal transition, but the thing that I have enjoyed most is one of my first early recipes that I kind of landed on along with the dal was like a white bean sausage kale stew thing. And it's easy to make. You just kind of bung it all in a stew and it is good the next day. That is the kind of thing I feel like eating. The Alison Roman chickpea stew was also a first for me, although I find that has such a distinct taste now, as I can only really enjoy it. Like, I feel like I've sort of eaten it too much now to really crave it. But that sort of formula of like hearty, I guess, and warm, like still got some vegetable elements in it as well, is what I'm sort of leaning towards at the moment. And again, they're often one pot dishes, which is good for me. Ruby Tando does a really nice smoky aubergine stew, which is 3 or 4 aubergines with like a stick of cinnamon. And that's really good. Just like you've got like a kind of depth of flavor, but it is pretty foolproof. I kind of just want a bowl of something when it's dark at like, 5 p.m., like just being like, well, we're counting down to stew time now.
Yeah, definitely. I think beans and sausage.
Yeah.
Amazing combination.
Yeah. And the other thing that I got since moving in to this house, because I had more counter space, was I got an air fryer. At first, I thought they were just a bit of a gimmick. Like, I've never had a pressure cooker or anything like that. The appliance I really only use is microwave and the blender. But the air fryer has been really useful for exactly those quick kind of painless meals that I like eating. Like with the chicken salads, I could just put it like the chicken in a drawer with some seasoning and it would be done in 10 minutes. And that really took out a lot of the kind of dauntedness I felt with cooking meat. And it's a very good way of cooking meat for one. Just somehow feels less labor intensive than baking a whole like kind of tin of it, or you could do it in individual portions in 10 minutes. And so that has made me less kind of nervous about eating meat and really fit into my lifestyle in a way where it's kind of get it going and leave it kind of thing. Like that has worked well. Whereas I find with the ovens, it can be quite temperamental and also harder to clean and adds to the washing up and so on. So I've really liked that. And that was a kind of game changer just because it does suit. I think I use it differently to how a lot of people use theirs, just like to prepare individual ingredients or parts of a meal. But it really works for my lifestyle and how I kind of approach cooking in a way that's like quite validating to like, oh, I found this thing that works, and this has made a difference.
Yeah, I recently started using a pressure cooker.
Yeah.
And my mom used to cook with a pressure cooker all through my childhood, and I never had one. And then a friend gave me one because she was having a clear out. I really like it.
Yeah.
I mean, it cooks things like beans from dry
Okay. Yeah.
really well, and it also cooks the really cheap cuts of meat that need normally long cooking. That, I'd put in the slow cooker for 8 hours, but now I can just get them done like in less than 2.
Right. Because my friend got one recently, was trying to sell me on it. And I was kind of like, I've got enough gadgets. I don't have enough counter space. I was reluctant to try it because I work from home. So I am constantly home during the day. Like I could see why people like it if they're going out to an office and coming home. But I was like, I don't necessarily see what issue this will solve in my life. But now that I'm thinking about it and you described that, it's like, no, this does seem quite well suited to the stews that I like to have and my general approach of get it going and leave it. So maybe I will look into that.
So, and if you would pick 3 of your favorite kitchen hacks that have made your life easier?
Having everything that you need on hand, like having the basic ingredients that you continually use, like available. I always have red onions, I always have brown onions, I always have tinned tomatoes. Like there's always something I can pull together, even if it's very simple. The other thing is when you do have the energy to try something new or cook, like kind of devote more time to it, I always make like double the portions and then freeze them. At the moment, I've got frozen portions of lasagna, of a kind of bean stew. And just when I really can't be bothered, it's really nice to just know that I can pull that out and eat very quickly. It stops me from getting delivery food or just eating an extremely sad meal when I have that backlog of recipes I've already kind of done. So that's just kind of like fallbacks when you don't have the time or energy. And then the other thing I think is, finding those recipe writers who I really relate to and trust. It takes a lot of the guesswork out because you do oddly notice these themes in their work and you kind of predict how they're going to taste. So once you've kind of internalized that, it becomes a lot easier to know whose recipes you feel like on any given day, I think. So I'm more in the mentality, as you can see, of like maintenance, not breaking the streak and not making mistakes. I haven't yet developed the kind of like ambitiousness or experimental tendency. But for me, this is a good place. I don't think I will ever be someone who's like really gets a thrill out of trying like hard levels, like recipes way above my level. But I do like to kind of see where I can gradually increase it.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't try complicated recipes just because I can't be bothered to make complicated things. I like trying new flavors.
Yeah.
That's where experimenting comes in for me.
Yeah, it's interesting because my sister lives in Amsterdam, so I spend a lot of time there with her, and I always enjoy just like different countries reach for different flavors. Like that was where I sort of got into speculoos, which was sort of an interesting one. I kind of try and bring things back a bit, like some herbs or spices I haven't heard of. But then they do have a tendency of just sitting in my larder where I brought back a Chinese 5-spice and za'atar. And both of them is like, I know I've enjoyed in other dishes that people have made for me, but I have never cooked with them at home because they're just not cuisines that my parents grew up cooking. I haven't lived with anyone or had any friends who've cooked with them for me. So they are just kind of there as like spices I know I enjoy, but have not yet kind of drummed up the time or courage or opportunity to actually cook with myself, because it's not so much the hopping from places I'm familiar with. It would be more something that I don't have any precedent for how to do kind of thing.
And what is your go-to emergency meal? I mean, you have mentioned quite a few so far, but the kind of thing, obviously taking things out of the freezer, you said, but you don't really feel like cooking. What do you cook?
I think that would have been the dal, and then I just leaned on it so heavily that now I don't reach for it as much. I think the Alison Roman shallot pasta is very good. That was also what really taught me that I could possibly eat anchovies, which was like she says in the recipe, you don't taste them, they dissolve in the sauce. And I didn't believe her, but she's right, they do. It's very simple. It's just a lot of shallots, tomato paste, some anchovies that dissolve, and then like tons of, I think it's parsley on top. But it really is quick to do, pretty simple. And I always save, as she suggests, half the sauce for like frying eggs the next morning. Like it's kind of like, it's just a easy bowl of pasta that you can then repurpose this element the next day. So it feels like not only are you feeding yourself quickly, but you're also kind of getting ahead of the next time you have to eat. So sometimes I can find that endless, God, we've got to eat again, we've got to do the dishes again. Sometimes it can seem more of a hassle than a joy. So if I can kind of kill two birds with one stone, then that's rewarding.
Yeah, cooking is rewarding in the end, isn't it?
I definitely feel better being able to take care of myself in this way. And it has made my life better. But it's something about the kind of fetishization of food that we can fall into with like very fancy kitchen ingredients or very fancy meals or little Michelin towers and stuff. That still makes me feel very impatient. Ultimately, it's not necessarily the food I remember about eating with friends or going out, you know, like it is still to me secondary to the purpose of that interaction, I think.
Yeah, I think this is something to do with the food culture we have around us, isn't it? That so much of food culture is about trying to be a chef, but everyday cooking really is about feeding ourselves.
Yeah, and it sort of feels like a strange status flex a lot of the time for people, which is not how I like to live my life in any area. So I've never been very interested in watching cooking shows. And I think probably that idea of being a foodie really affirmed the sense that it wasn't for me. Like I would just be happily keep getting by. But now that I have some skills myself, I do feel I have more respect for people like Anna Jones and Rukmini who do a lot to make it accessible and understand what people want. Ruby Tando's book is very good for being aware of people with like, you know, mental illness who might struggle to eat, or, you know, some things that might be like disabilities that make it harder to cook. And I think that is a really kind of laudable way of making it more functional and accessible in a way that we've sort of got away from in the last kind of 20 years.
Well, I can only agree. And I think this is one of the reasons, the main reason why this podcast exists, because I just find it weird that the only people who ever get to talk about cooking publicly is the chefs and the specialists. And what about all of us who cook every day to feed ourselves?
It's a good point, because it's like, it's also, I think people are quite interested in how there's a sort of voyeuristic quality in like looking inside someone else's fridge. And you can learn a lot about someone from like how many things that are out of date that they just haven't used. Or like my flatmate and I had completely different ideas about how to go about making a meal. And I think it is interesting. My friend who is also doing weightlifting, he and I talk a lot about ways we find of getting more protein. I introduced him to cottage cheese the other day, and we both kind of like talk about it in that way. But I think, you know, I've learned a lot over the course of my life in share houses and kind of moving around the world. Like I've learned a lot about cooking from friends and people I've lived with. And it seems weird that there isn't more of that kind of person to person sharing in a way that isn't just like trying to be an Instagram chef or kind of celebrity, where it is just like, no, we're just trying to make it through the day feeding ourselves.
Well, and you've just given us so many tips. I mean, that must be the most dense episode I've recorded so far.
I get told that a lot, that I'm a bit of there's something I've thought about, it's a bit overwhelming.
I wouldn't say overwhelming. It was just so many amazing tips and thought processes. And so that was
Thank you.
a really, really great conversation. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. You have got me thinking now in terms of getting the pressure cooker. I am thinking I'm too quick to dismiss that. You see, this is how we learn.
But, you know, I got to being 53 until I got a pressure cooker. even though I grew up around one.
My mum's continually telling me I should get one, but I just thought it was like, it felt like a kind of old piece of technology that surely we must have made redundant now. But I can see now, having had my experience, like the same skepticism about the air fryer as a newfangled one we don't really need, and then having that make my life better, I can see that it might be worth looking into. It's a continual process. And some days I just accept I don't have the interest or the energy. And then it's just about doing better than I did 10 years ago when it was like really just scrambling to make by.
And I think, again, that's what it is about, isn't it? About consistently feeding ourselves something good. It's really not about anything else.
I very rarely get food delivery, and mostly that's a financial constraint, but also I find a variety of options on offer just makes me exhausted when it should be a time saver. Now that I have the kind of equivalence of like options I can make myself, that's just kind of removes that from my life. And I'm always interested to meet people, and there are lots of them who spend hundreds of pounds on it each month. And I'm like, well, it wouldn't, if you had the right things in your fridge, it wouldn't necessarily arrive quicker than a Rukmini Aya roasting tin one would. You know, like, I just think that you need to know that, have that awareness and have the kind of confidence and the baseline skill where it becomes an option. And now if I ever do get delivery food, it is because I want a specific taste that I can't do, like a really stodgy Domino's pizza kind of thing, which is what I had on the weekend. And it's like, then it's fine and enjoyable. And I know exactly what I want and it's available immediately and I know why I've gotten it. But it's not just in the absence of other ideas.
Yeah, I can only agree. Yeah, it all has its place.
I think you have to feel like you're kind of in control of it or choosing it if you do.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Elle. That was a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed it. It was helpful for me to actually pause and stop and like, now I have in my mind, I'm like, okay, got to look up some winter salads, research pressure cooker, and maybe make a stew. So it was helpful for me to check in as well.
Well, that's how it goes.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of At Home with the Intuitive Cook. Check out the show notes for links and tasty morsels. And remember, fresh episodes are served up every other Friday. Subscribe to stay tuned and keep exploring the joys of everyday cooking. Until next time, stay curious, trust your taste, and don't forget, it's not rocket science, it's just dinner.